Welcome to the Smart Driving Cars podcast. Thank you for taking the time with us. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more info, head to motoetf.com. Technical support is provided by CARTS, the Corporation for Automated Road Transportation Safety, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to safe and high-quality mobility for all. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alain Kornhauser. Hi again, Alain.
Good morning, Fred.
Good morning. Well, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, known by many as NHTSA, has released initial data on safety performance of advanced vehicle technologies. There are varied headlines in the press, mostly focused on the 392 crashes involving vehicles equipped with Level 2 driver assistance technology. Joining us for the discussion, we are happy to welcome Ed Niedermeyer, who has covered the auto industry for years for major publications, is the author of Ludicrous, the Unvarnished Story of Tesla Motors, and is co-host of the Autonocast podcast. He's also served as communications director until recently for Partners for Automated Vehicle Education, or PAVE. Good to see you, Ed.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Well, we're going to turn to you first for your view of what the NHTSA report does and doesn't say. The data here was collected, I think, under an order issued last year.
Yeah, so I think it's really one of the most important things when talking about this data is to really make sure that people do understand their limitations to it. You know, I think I kind of compare it to the California disengagement report in the sense that, you know, for the public, we have so very few data points to go on to really understand what's going on in this space. And so when we do get, you know, some data, people tend to latch onto it and tend to sort of build everything up on top of that. And so I think it's really important to understand the limitations here. And specifically, you know, in that, you know, not everyone is playing on the same field in terms of the reporting of this data, right? So, you know, Tesla is, you know, in a lot of the headlines for the number of crashes. And, you know, I personally do believe there's, you know, and certainly I think NHTSA has a number of investigations into autopilot. So I think there is reason for concern there, but I do think it's important to recognize as well that, you know, Tesla has every single one of the vehicles in their fleet is connected. It's very easy for them to get this crash data and report it to NHTSA, whereas other automakers rely on, you know, much more 20th century, shall we say, techniques for reporting that data. And so I think there are probably inconsistencies in reporting. Also, some of the reports from automakers come from like consumer complaints, which, as we know from the NHTSA defect database, is kind of an inconsistent way. But again, you know, just because this data is not perfect, we need to keep that in mind, but we also don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And you know, even small and imperfect amounts of data are like rain in the desert for us in this spae.
Interesting. Alan,
Ed, I think it's really good that you point that out because NHTSA points it out also. I think if you read what they've put out, they say, you know, don't compare this. You know, some may be apples, some may be oranges, and so there are those limitations. And I think you pointed out the issue with any data set is sampling bias. Okay, I mean, if it's all the right, if there's no sample bias, you just grab it, you know, then, you know, then all the theory that goes behind statistics works. Okay, and everybody's in agreement. But always, you know, everywhere you have to be worried about sample bias. And I think you pointed out here, I mean, you know, for Tesla, they almost have to report everyone because they've been ordered to report everyone and they know everyone. Therefore, if they don't report it, then it's a Nixon cover-up, you know, and we know the cover-up is the worst crime than the deed when you get right down to it. So in a sense, and for the others, you know, they have none. They don't have this. It's not that they're putting their heads in the sand and saying, you know, we don't want to know, but the mechanism by which one would find out is just enormously difficult here. I mean, the VIN number doesn't point out what is on the car. I mean, it points out what used to be on cars when VIN numbers were originally designed, but it doesn't include whether or not it's, this release of this whatever that's on there that does this A, B, C, D, E, F, or G. So you can't even rely on VIN number, and a lot of things you want to go there. So, I mean, those issues, and we need to point that out right from the beginning, because it's probably important here, right?
Yeah. And I think these issues with sampling bias and just the challenges around reporting are especially important when you're trying to take sort of big high level takeaways, right? And also one of the factors in here, right, is that we don't have the mileage, right? And so you can't come up with like a crash per mile, vehicle mile traveled thing, which would be the first step towards establishing sort of a high level comparison. And again, NHTSA is careful to warn us, don't compare, one competitor to another. And I think that's really important, but that doesn't mean there aren't other insights that you can't get from the data. Right. And I think that, already we've, found some pretty interesting things. For example, in the Tesla crashes, and this is just since August of last year, one of the fields in the data say, refers to sort of the last reported action that was taken before the crash. And we found, I did a live stream on YouTube when the data first came out, and we were playing around and looking around in it. We found 29 crashes just since August of last year of Teslas, where the last known action was departure from the lane or departure from the roadway. And, that's something where, okay, so it's 29 cases. We don't know, a rate of per vehicle miles traveled. We can't really put our finger on the scope of that problem, but just at first blush, the idea that a driver assistance system, specifically one that involves, lane keeping, would be departing from the lane or the roadway in 29 crashes, just in less than a year of data. Like that's something where, again, it's not a big high level takeaway. You have to dig in and find these sort of individual things. But I think that's one of these sorts of things that to me jumps out as like, okay, maybe there are some real reasons for concern here.
Yeah, I think, to sort of go along with what you found in looking at the data, some of the things that have always that I've complained about, and you look at these data. The other one is the last reported is going straight, and the going straight. Then when you look at the going straight, what was the other guy doing? The other guy was stopped. And I've been I don't know, I've been way out on the complete edge end of the distribution, and saying, there in the automation of the vehicle, there are two states that you can be in. You're either vehicle following or you're vehicle leading. Okay, and if you're vehicle following, it's almost easy. Okay, because it's always easier to follow than it is to lead. I think, not that I've gotten a chance to lead all that much, but, I'm pretty well chopped up every time I go out there in the front. And the issue with when you're leading is when you sense a stationary object ahead. I've been claiming that in every one of their algorithms, they find that and they throw it out. They disregard it. It was made absolutely explicit in the Uber data in the Arizona crash that killed Alain Herzberg. They saw her 6 seconds before they hit her. Why'd they hit her? Because it was a stationary object ahead that they said, well, there can't be. It can't be. We have to be able to pass underneath it. My goodness, any other most of the stationary objects that we see in the lane ahead, we pass underneath. All the trees, all the overpasses, all the signs, all these things are like things that, when these systems are operating, what do they see? They usually see stationary objects. Okay, a lot of the times the stationary objects are out there. Hey, we got a gap. Every once in a while, they're here. Right. Okay, and if they're here, are they here or are they here? and it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that reliably, then what do you do? And in fact, in one of the Tesla crashes, you go look at, they've redacted most of the, really valuable information that one would have to try to, figure out what the heck happened. And I hope that those that get to look at the unredacted or redacted information can, go figure it out, what really happened. But my goodness, they didn't put on the brakes.
Yeah.
And in fact, the automated emergency braking system didn't kick in.
Yeah.
And there's no discussion here as to how the automated emergency braking system should correlate with these systems.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're, these things are not designed as being like this.
Right.
As opposed to maybe coming together.
Yeah.
And of course, why is that? That's because, to me, that's because NHTSA forever has been in the crash mitigation business, not the crash avoidance business.
Yep.
Now they find themselves in the crash avoidance business. And the crash avoidance business is different than the crash mitigation business, because the crash mitigation business was they eat the crash and not kill the person.
Yeah.
Okay. In the crash avoidance business, it's avoid the crash. Okay. Which of course we don't. That's one thing we don't know about these systems. We don't know how many crashes they avoided. Or maybe we would know if we had all the Tesla data and so on, the way they collect it, we could reconstruct it the way Waymo went in and has. I mean, what has Waymo really done well, my opinion, is they've gone in there and with all their crashes, they've had all the data that Tesla has, and they've gone and analyzed it, and they've gone and simulated what if we wouldn't have disengaged, what if we did, and all that and so on, and all the, and I think but you have to be able to get to that depth to be able to understand what it is one should be doing here with all this. And what do you know?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up a number of things that I think are really, there's some interesting insights to in the data. And so I know, having spoken to a lot of people in the industry in the lead up to this, that there was a lot of concern that the way that this would be distributed and reported, there'd be a lot of confusion of ADAS and fully autonomous automated driving systems, right? And I know this is something the industry is generally concerned about, something we worked on a lot when I was at PAVE. And I think the reporting has been fairly good. And in part, I think in a way, this is really helping separate the things. And one of the really fascinating things in the data that we found was that, the ADAS crashes that happened, first of all, there were more of them, which makes sense. We don't know how many miles, but many, many more miles, obviously driven under ADAS. But the ADAS crashes were overwhelmingly did damage. So again, there's field for where on the vehicle was damaged. And with the ADAS crashes, it was overwhelmingly the front of the car, the front, right, the front left, the front right. So this is implying these vehicles are crashing into things that they're not seeing. And again, I think, those of us who are familiar with the technology understand that, to get these systems down to a price point where they can sell on a car to private ownership, you can't have LiDAR at this point, with the cost. You can't have, the very most sophisticated, sensors and stuff. And what's fascinating is when you look at the ADS data, the fully autonomous vehicle, the Waymos, they're overwhelmingly being hit by vehicles. Right. So overwhelmingly the damage, they do get some front damage. It does happen, but overwhelmingly it's mostly in the rear of the vehicle. And this is also something that, for those of us who followed the space for a while, we know that this is sort of a common thing for many years now. And it seems to be in part tied to the challenge of driving naturalistically. And oftentimes, these, and not to blame the autonomous vehicle, obviously they're the one getting hit, and it's important to understand those are not at fault crashes, right? For the most part, if you're getting hit from behind, right, it's almost certainly not your fault. But also, there have been discussion and reporting around the idea that it can be difficult for for human drivers, sometimes if you are behind an autonomous vehicle and it's not driving naturalistically, it can be a little harder to interact with, and that sometimes leads to these sort of low speed rear, kind of collisions. But I think this specific data point is so important for people to understand, and hopefully we can get this out in the media more, because I think understanding, when you have vehicles that are not only having more crashes, but they're actually running into things, that's a safety risk that you have to take more seriously, I think, than these sort of low speed, sort of getting hit from behind things that you're seeing with fully autonomous vehicles. And I really hope if these data get out and people really understand this, this will be a really important step in solving this, what I think is one of the biggest educational challenges in this space, which is differentiating autonomous vehicles and ADAS. And I think the industry's concerns were proper that this might confuse them. But I think, and I was sort of hopeful going into this, and so far I continue to be hopeful that this data, and especially as it gets refined and improved, that it will actually help differentiate these two sort of classes of technology in the minds of the public, which again is just so important.
Well, yeah, I think it's kind of key with this. You call it naturalistic. The problem is that those in driving, we misbehave. We just, we supposedly have rules. We supposedly have laws. We supposedly are supposed to do things this way. But boy, we just don't. Yeah. And when we don't is when we get into trouble. When we do, we're all fine and dandy. And certainly, if it's sort of always been kind of my discussion that in fact we may need two rules of the roads. We may need a rule of the road that is according to these are rules that are followed by humans that have all their various whatever tendencies to disregard, whether to do, misbehave, and so on. And because it deals with a human. And then we may need other rules in which we deal with algorithms. Because when we write algorithms, boy, it's line at a time, boom, 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 to, 64 bits, bam. Okay, I don't care if it's deep learning or non-deep learning, it does it, boom. And that is a whole different perspective as to how one thing operates versus how another thing operates. And I, as a general matter, I just don't think you can have a set of rules that says, hey, we're going to have one entity that is all over the damn place in terms of responding to it, behaving the same way that another entity who is going to take it down to the 64 bits. It's different. So therefore, we may need to address. We may need to say that the speed limit for a human is 65 miles an hour. The speed limit for an algorithm is 74. Okay. I've thrown this out and people think I'm nuts. Okay. But in a sense, if you go on the New Jersey Turnpike and it's medium crowded and you do 65, you're a menace.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you stop at a stop sign in Boston, you're a menace.
Yep.
If you don't go through a red light for the first 7 seconds of the red light in Boston, you're a menace. Why? Because that's the way, I don't know, maybe it's not the way Bostonians drive. It's the way we in Princeton say people at Harvard drive. I don't know, whatever. You call it whatever you want, but it's, I'm overstating it, of course.
No,
but this is the issue we're dealing with, and especially in something that for 100+ years has been sold to us as this thing that every one of our macho tendencies says we control, we make happen, We do donuts on our neighbors' lawns. We aggressively and in it, and my speedometer says 220 miles an hour. What, in Jersey? Are you joking? And I can do 0 to 60 and what? Where on Cleveland Lane out here? Are you joking?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the sociology that's in all this darn thing, and it just makes it really tough. Okay, yeah. and so NHTSA, I think, has to somehow, or we as a society have to come into play with this thing. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think I recently went for a ride in Waymo in San Francisco, and I think some of the most impressive AV rides have been from Waymo and Zoox, both in San Francisco, because that is just such a stochastic environment, and it's like Brownian motion. Things are just in motion in ways that are just, I think if you haven't been in a place like that, and especially right. In the suburbs or and frankly, it's amazingly impressive. A lot of people thought that Waymo would be sort of stuck in sort of Phoenix mode, with big wide open streets and, carefully controlled everything. And I'll tell you, San Francisco, it's just randomness all around you. And, it doesn't matter. And, as a human driver, it doesn't matter how good of a driver you are, things will happen, right? Like again, right. when you get that kind of Brownian motion, like things just collide with each other inevitably. And so I think, I think actually getting this crash data and learning that with these fully autonomous vehicles, that a lot of it are crashes that, the system could not have done anything about. Right. I think that's going to be actually it's weird. You don't think of crash data as being something that will build public trust, which again, I think the industry has been really anxious to do. And I think that these crash data are actually going to build public trust. And I think there's a really important lesson there, which is that, fundamentally, and I understand it's very hard to be, as transparent as you want to be in the autonomous vehicle space. It's just there's a lot of secrets and a lot of, kind of poker playing and things like that on the technical level and the business level and everything else. But I think that the fact that crash data is actually providing a basis to start to build more public trust, which again is just so important for this technology. I hope that we learn from that. And again, as you kind of alluded to, I think that this first step in collecting and publicizing data continues to improve so that the quality and the insights that the public get out of it continue to improve. Because again, I think that will actually be one of the most important things towards building that public trust.
You touched on this a little bit, Ed, and I know, Alan, it's a concern of yours. So you have this data out there that's valuable. At the same time, the way the public consumes it is through the media, and the media looks for a big audience very often. And so you get clickbait kinds of headlines, or even some serious journalism maybe doesn't get it right in terms of what the public should understand about this. Tell us what your thoughts are about how we can bridge that. We need this data, but at the same time, there needs to be a public understanding of what it is and what it isn't.
Yeah, no, and I think, I think it is important to make sure that this education is happening. First of all, I would like to say, I think, a lot of people in the industry, as I alluded to, saw this sort of as a test for the media. And I haven't done like a really fully comprehensive, I need to do that probably today, is just kind of really go through and really take stock of the coverage. But I think it's been better than people expected. And I think the media has been making a lot of progress kind of quietly over the last couple of years. A couple of years ago in 2020, a woman named Liza Dixon came out with a story, a paper, an academic paper called autonowashing. And there was something about that word and her very elegant explanation of why it's so important that in a human in the loop system, the driver's trust is calibrated to the actual capabilities of that system. And she just made it very easy to understand. But I think more than anything, it was coining that term autonowashing. And it started to take off on Twitter. And then you started to hear it in conversations. And it still hasn't gone, I think, as far as it can. But I think especially for the media who are looking at that public discourse around this technology, it really helped bring home their responsibility to get these things right, and in particular around not letting people believe that systems that are not autonomous are more autonomous than they are. So I think, more progress needs to be made. And I think that, the industry, I think, there are, there's infrastructure in place, I think, to kind of do more of that media outreach and education. But I think it's really encouraging that progress is there. And frankly, what I would do is, or my advice to the industry would be sort of, okay, we know that this NHTSA data is going to continue to be updated on a monthly basis. There's going to continue to be stories about it. This is going to be a resource that people, for all of its shortcomings, are going to continue to use to try and understand this space. Maybe use that as a focal point for maybe some initiatives to reach out to the media and educate and engage. Because I think there's a lot of interesting stories in there. And I think, folks in the media are trying to cover so many different things. They really need the help of folks in the industry to help them make sense of these things, what matters, what doesn't, and what does it all actually mean.
Alan?
Yeah, well, of course I agree here. I think a couple of points I've made, and I'd like to, of course, make again, that on the safety piece, everybody should be cooperating. There shouldn't be any competition. I mean, there almost shouldn't be any IP. I mean, what one of these companies is going to say, hey, I know the thing to avoid and you don't. And so I'm going to wait until you nail that person, and then you'll figure. I mean, come on. I mean, that's just no way to behave. The safer this industry as a whole can become, the faster, the better everybody is. So if there should be collusion within the industry, there should be collusion on safety, and there should be collusion with respect to these data, and everybody should be sharing it. And, whenever Waymo comes out, hey, look at this corner case that I found. Hey, everybody pay attention. I might even share how I'm going to handle it. I mean, that should be there. I mean, they shouldn't be competing on this stuff because if one looks at what the killing of Alain Herzberg did to the industry, there is not a more severe crunch on the industry that was placed on it. I mean, even this whole, Russia invading Ukraine wasn't as big. Okay. I mean, it took the wind out of it. Okay. It took the complete wind out of Uber and Lyft, basically made those companies, I don't know. I just think impossible to succeed without it.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's one crash.
Yeah.
One.
Absolutely.
So, when NHTSA goes on and says Pony AI or whatever, or California says, look, hey, you folks in this business should not be misbehaving in any way having to do with safety. They should be, hey, help me, please, as soon as because the biggest problem with safety is we don't know what we don't know. Okay, all the yellow stickers all over my car having to deal with the passenger airbag possibly killing a child. When people put airbags first in passenger seats, nobody ever thought it was going to kill a child.
Yeah,
we didn't know.
Yeah.
We didn't. All of a sudden, the child got killed. Oh my goodness. Okay, now let everybody know. Look, we got to be careful about this one. I mean, this is the same fundamental situation we're here in.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what all this running into the back end. It's not running into the back end of fire trucks with lights on. It's a stationary object ahead, guys.
Yeah.
When you're leading, that is a tough thing to deal with because you always assume such a high percentage of the case you can pass underneath that sucker. Okay. And the few times that you can't, you've got, and so the code has to be tight in that. Yeah. And we need to make that tight. We make that tight so that, the brakes aren't, tapping and somebody, why'd the brakes go on? Oh, geez, I have to take it back to the dealer because it's not working right. That false alarm rate at that point is just such a tough one. Anyway,
well, and I
bunch
think
of along those lines, but whatever.
People have asked me a couple of times, why they think NHTSA sort of released this data set so quickly. I mean, this is less than a year of data, right?
No,
I think you have to look, well, no, and I think you have to look at sort of the other things that NHTSA sort of has on its plate and its docket. So of course you have, a number of investigations into Tesla Autopilot. I think clearly these data are relevant to that and will probably be part of building that case. But I think the other piece is, comments just last week closed on an update to NCAP. And one of the big pieces of that update to NCAP that's now moving forward is discussion of how to improve the driver assistance systems, particularly vulnerable road user, so like pedestrian aware AEB, and low light conditions. We know that vulnerable road user deaths continue to go up.
Yeah.
They happen largely in low light conditions, things like that. And so so I think this ADAS data in the set showing, first of all, actually it shows a couple of things. So first of all, I mentioned that it's predominantly cars running into things, which again, I think
right.
you've discussed some of the challenges with perception around that, and maybe especially if you're going to have to get a 4 or 5 star rating, you have to do much better on the pedestrian crash thing. Maybe this will be something that will encourage LiDAR into more passenger vehicles and potentially bending the cost curve on that, which I think has some interesting potential. Again, I don't want to get too carried away, but one of the other interesting things in the data as well is there were a couple of vulnerable road user crashes in that data set, which in the ADAS data set, which you would not assume would be there, because level 2 systems are almost universally designed for the freeway, controlled access freeway operational design domain. And so how are they hitting VRUs, right? And it's because people are activating these systems outside of there. They're activating them on public roads, and the automakers are not putting these constraints in. And the NTSB and several, Tesla crash investigations have pointed this out as a factor. And so I think there's like a number of actionable items in this data that kind of align with some of the things that NHTSA is looking at, sort of making progress on. And so I'm really, I think it's going to be really interesting to see sort of how they kind of pull on some of the insights in this data in building policy going forward. And again, as this data collection gets better and better, I mean, in theory, at least, right, that's going to allow them to kind of make better and better, not just sort of a defect investigation and enforcement type of stuff, but really proactively making better policy. And that's one of the things I'm pretty excited about this whole effort.
Yeah, I think, and I spent a little bit of time looking at the data. I think one of the Tesla fatalities is a pedestrian. I think the impact velocity that they happen to have in there, off the top of my head, is like 40 miles an hour type of thing, and so on. Unfortunately, there's a lot of redacting. There's not enough information there to know where it is. Doesn't have a lat long on it. Doesn't, I mean, they redacted all that. I tried to do a geographic distribution of all the, the 200 and whatever, and the best you can do is by city. And, it is, of course, mostly California, Texas, center of the country. I don't know, maybe in Iowa they don't report things or something like that, or maybe Iowa. I don't know. I just wanted to see what the heck the geographic distribution of the darn data were, and looking at it. But there are also some issues with respect to some of these things, because there are all sorts of other extraneous circumstances that can exist. In some places, suicides by kissing a car is I know, it's probably not something one should mention here. We have the Northeast Corridor, a couple miles at Princeton Junction, 125 miles an hour. I mean, you don't even want to mention it, okay? Yeah. But and the problem is we're dealing with very low rates here. We're dealing with very few data points. Which is, in some sense, I mean, when one looks at the fact that there are only less than 300 I mean, given the number of crashes,
Yep.
that occur, there are 100 plus fatalities a day, the number of crashes that occur are like, wow. And the definition of a crash here is, especially in the automated side, it's like, I think in one, a pedestrian collided with a stopped vehicle. It's almost that bad. I mean, and the one, I think, in thinking back to the earlier data from California, I think it was a 2 mile an hour. Was it the bus's fault or was it the Waymo's car's fault? It was really a toss up. But so anyway, all that needs to be. We're learning an enormous amount.
Yeah.
To me, maybe the biggest takeaway is that the numbers are really this small.
Yeah.
And even for Tesla, that they're this small, given that they know everyone, and unless they're covering up, which I doubt it, because again, as we said, first thing, that's worse than the crime.
It is, although I've in my reporting, I've certainly caught Tesla covering things up before. So that doesn't mean that they're doing it in this case.
No,
but it's worth trust but verify, right?
Absolutely, trust but verify. That's my motto on all these things. Absolutely, but from the looks at it. There are some things that we're learning that we can do a heck of a lot better.
Yeah.
And
I think like there's been sort of a vacuum, around this kind of data in the public discourse, at least. And kind of what's filled that vacuum up to this point has actually really been Tesla's, again, Elon Musk and Tesla, say whatever else you want about them. They're great at getting people's attention. Right. And they've kind of set the definitions a little bit around this whole conversation by releasing this quarterly safety report, which has really been the only thing like it. And that's really been sort of set the rules of just, again, in the public discourse realm. And one of the things that's kind of concerning about that is, first of all, I mean, there's some really, I think important questions about the representations that they make in those claims, right? For example, and Noah Goodall, a researcher at Virginia Tech, has recently come out with a paper that I think finally really provides some credible clarification on this, that, you can't just say, here's the average human driver and here's autopilot, again, a system that's designed for access, controlled access freeways, which are the safest domain, overwhelmingly the safest kind of road you can operate in. And they're apples to apples. Like, no, they're not. You have to adjust based on those things. But there's a deeper level thing going on here where Tesla kind of makes the argument that like, these safety concerns, like these very specific design issues that were surfaced in these individual NTSB investigations, like that they somehow don't matter, because when you just take the 40,000 foot view on a crashes per mile basis, autopilot looks, again, without controlling for these factors. Also, by the way, Tesla in its safety report, they only count crashes within 5 seconds, where autopilot was active within 5 seconds of impact. And I'm sorry, but like all of the handoff problems show you need to, like NHTSA is looking at 30 seconds, right? And I think you need that much, much bigger window to accurately gauge when a system is contributing. But the point that I'm making here is that again, I think the fact that Tesla has sort of set the discussion, again, just in the public realm, not really among experts necessarily, but they've sort of established the framing of the whole conversation that way. And so that's why I think everyone wanted to, like, when they got this data, pull out these high level, crash per mile type of comparisons. And again, I think instead the really interesting insights are going to be sort of like, here are these behaviors that keep showing up of, again, lane keeping systems that are going off the lane or off the road, immediately before crashes. And I think I think sort of, so we don't just need to help get the data out there, but also kind of reframing this conversation and saying, look, just because you have a low crash rate doesn't mean you don't potentially have safety issues. A lot of times safety issues are found, right? So if you think of that high level analysis is sort of like, the macro analysis, a lot of defects actually probably more are found through sort of a micro analysis of sort of doing an engineering, root cause analysis of individual cases, because you can have these individual defects of various kinds that may not show up statistically across the sweep of things, but still present an unreasonable risk to public safety. And that's one important piece of helping people, I think, understand these data.
Absolutely. I mean, on these data, we should fix some things. And again, to me, the things that really look at is when the vehicles were going straight, they were hitting stuff. Okay. Shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. The whole lane departure thing, business. Okay, where in the heck was it? Were there lines or weren't there lines? Okay, was it a misbehavior by the individual, or was it, my goodness, get this darn thing to really work and follow the damn lines? Okay, and the other thing to me is, somehow we have this automated emergency braking thing that's, I guess, finally, it doesn't just warn us, it supposedly does something for us. But darn thing waits till 1.6 seconds before collision. Oh my goodness, why didn't you do this 1.7 seconds before collision? Why didn't you start doing something 1.8 seconds? Would it really hurt me if you would have started doing something 2.5 seconds before collisions and maybe not, tried to won't break loose? And then how does this fit in with the whole intelligent cruise control thing that, to me, seems to work damn well? I use it all the time. Okay. I mean, I think it's wonderful. Okay. But I've never seen mine not work. But in a sense, those are things that we can learn here. And to me, I guess the other number is, I haven't gone through sort of the normalization. Either these systems are not being sold, not being used, but if this is all the crashes they cause, my goodness, they're pretty damn good. Okay. But it may be that they're not selling any of them and nobody's using them, or, nobody's reporting them. I think those are the things. I think there's still some things that we could do with these systems that can improve them. Okay. Because the numbers are small.
Yeah.
And especially if you take Tesla out of it, for the rest of them, they're Mercedes has zero.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Even though I think I hit a deer with mine on. Okay.
Yeah, no, and I think that's one of the really important things is that NHTSA does need to continue to improve and make sure that the automakers are improving their capacity. Like, kind of the weak point of this is that so much does depend on how good the automakers are at collecting the data, and they will improve as cars get more connected. But I think this creates an incentive to make sure that capacity gets built, and I really hope that NHTSA works proactively to build that capacity so that this data gets better and better and better. So that, again, like all these
and
things,
they should want to improve, because they should want to know, because out of knowing, then they can figure out what they don't know to improve the darn thing. So it is very much and share it with the others, darn it. And if Washington doesn't let you, then do get some legislation that says you can collude on safety. Okay, that is an antitrust. That is in the public value domain. Anyway, that's my sorry to.
Well, we'll be back, but this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, head to motoetf.com. On the website, look for a white paper. It's called the Smart Transportation Revolution. You'll find it under the Insights and News tab. Some great information there to help you make informed decisions about investing. ETFs, you may know, can be a good way to spread risk with investments. Maybe focus on a particular category of stocks. The website again is motoetf.com. We are back with more of Smart Driving Cars and our guest, Ed Niedermeyer. Ed, along the lines of what we were just talking about, the NHTSA report, future releases then we can assume are going to be even more valuable to us all?
I mean, I certainly hope so. I think, again, folks in the industry were really concerned about this initial, sort of dump. And I think part of that was just the fact that NHTSA I think they've kind of been on the back foot with this entire special general order. I think it kind of took them from surprise from the jump. And I think they've been sort of, not as in the loop as they maybe kind of wanted to be. And have very legitimate concerns about public confusion about this technology and the difficulty, right? It's just difficult to interpret this data properly, especially given all the just sort of fundamental constraints of how it's collected and reporting and sampling, biases and challenges. But I think all things considered, and I'm, excited to have more conversations with folks in the industry about this, but my sense is that this has gone better than they kind of feared, that the reporting, again, that, maybe not perfect, but there was some context provided for it. They did very clearly separate the data point. I think we're really glad it wasn't just, one spreadsheet with, or like two sheets in the same spreadsheet file or something like that. I think even just little subtle things like that could have helped confuse people and putting them in different Excel documents. And I think the media, stepped up to the challenge and was aware that this was going to be a challenge. And I think they've so far done pretty well. And I think the key is, there's sort of two pieces of this. On the NHTSA industry collaboration side, I think there needs to be a lot more just conversations. Like I think this has been, I think it's understandable that NHTSA wanted to do what it was going to do and not sort of have the industry influence it too much. But I think going forward, now that it's been established, they need to work together to improve this reporting, just so it's like, because if the data is going to come out, no one could fight that now. The data will continue to come out. The only question is, how good is it? And I think that, is something that everyone can collaborate on. And then separately, as I discussed before, I think the industry should really sort of embrace this data and the sort of ongoing release of it as an opportunity to build their relationships with folks in the media, helping them really understand these data, what they mean. And I think that those sort of two pieces, improving the collection and then improving the sort of public analysis and explanation, this is actually exactly the kind of thing that the industry has been trying to do. I mean, with PAVE, like this is like an amazing thing for that kind of effort. And so I think, I really hope that people, again, now that there's no doubt that it's happening, now it's like, okay, it's out, it's happening. We've taken this first step. Let's really find ways to work together to make the most of this.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think it's, as I look at the California disengagement reports, of course, when they first came out, everybody was really, hey, this can be gamed. Yeah, okay. Some people sat there and played games. Guess what? All the people who play games are now out of business, I think, in some sense. I mean, to me, my view of the disengagement reports, if I'm going to go out there and test, I want to maximize disengagements. I want to find the corners. I want to find the stuff that I don't know. That's what I'm testing for. Then I'm going to go back and fix it. But I'm done. If I know it's going to work here, am I going to just sit there and accumulate miles? So my disengagement per mile number, because I mean, kidding me? Get out of here. That's not the value of testing, and not to get something in some publication and some clickbait that said, "Ooh, no, man, I want to find out where I need to improve."
Yeah,
I hope that the industry takes this and says, "My goodness, all the crashes. I want to put it in the VIN number. What the heck this stuff is, so that because I know at least VIN number is going to get collected and I can go see, oh my goodness, it was this thing that was there, and get then from the VIN number right now to be able to go find this from a police report. I mean,
yeah,
that's hard work.
I
don't know who writes the algorithm that goes and scrapes all the police reports to go find this stuff. I mean, maybe I'll get one of my students to do that or something like that, but whatever, but it's not easy.
Yeah. And I think, I love the disengagement report comparison, because, as you said, like when that's the only data point you have, of course, people will latch onto it and overinterpret it, because what else are you going to go on? People are curious about this stuff, and so they're going to use what they have. I think the other really interesting sort of example of like where to, how to be careful about this. So I think in general, the lesson is, right, the more data you put out there, the more transparent you are, the less people will overinterpret any one piece of it, right, and you get a better picture, right? But then I think the other piece is, I know from my coverage of sort of the traditional auto industry and some of the safety scandals that have happened, the NHTSA complaint database is a very important tool for the regulator. And it's publicly available, but I think, we've also seen folks get into trouble. Certainly my colleagues in the media, I think in some of the past safety scandals got into trouble by overinterpreting that data, which is self-reported, self-selected, very subjective, oftentimes in crashes, particularly with ADAS, the person reporting this crash and describing it, because as you said, the narrative details, it's frustrating that's redacted. And I do hope that NHTSA going forward doesn't just put that in the hands of the company. I hope they force the companies to provide the narrative, and NHTSA itself does that redaction, so they keep it to only the bare minimum, because companies absolutely abuse that. But again, one of the things with the complaint database, and this is just talking about standard defects, this is not about driving automation technology here, is that it's just, people can kind of say whatever they want, and people's, just as people are sort of random and drive their vehicles, in sort of animal spirits kind of irrational ways. The same thing has to do with reporting data, right? Your perception and your retelling of a crash oftentimes is very subjective. And so that's something that I think NHTSA needs to be really careful about, is make sure this doesn't just turn into another one of those. Because that, I think, will make the data, there'll be so much noise, it'll be hard to get the signal. The
sample bias of that, it's the whole problem with the internet. Look, we're going to have a hearing at 1:00 this afternoon. It looks at, just crap out there that's put out there, that's whatever, that's, so you have to, there's data and there are data. There are supposed to be recorders on these things. Okay, the recorders are supposed to be just like the recorders we've had in aviation, that has basically saved our butt in aviation. What a beautiful thing to be in every airplane, is to have those two black boxes. Why? So that we could find out what we don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's important here. And if it shows up, look, if you're going to do something, nothing is perfectly safe, and we shouldn't even have that as an objective. Okay, it should be the reasonable, and to just do good work. And to do good work, you have to know what you don't know.
Yeah. No, and one thing I was really surprised in this data set as well, how few of the reports actually come from law enforcement reporting. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but it was a much smaller percentage than I thought. And so there, I think is it's not necessarily, it's a little maybe counterintuitive, but I think it's a really interesting avenue for improving the collection of this data, because frankly, again, I think the police or the first responders are going to be a more objective source of data about the crash than the person who was directly involved in it, for a whole bunch of reasons, right?
Yeah.
And so I think working with law enforcement to build their capacity to get that data, especially, because again, the sooner you collect it, the clearer it is, the more credible it is, and they're the first people there. And if they can, part of their, your workflow essentially is just taking down some of the key data points and improving the percentage of incidents in this database that's coming from law enforcement as opposed to the people involved in the crashes. I think that's a really good way to improve the quality of these data.
Well, that's a very good point. It may be just changing the workflow a little bit of the first responders. Maybe one of the things you ask is not only were you drinking or whatever, maybe even if they even ask those things, but who was driving? Did you have the damn thing on?
Yeah.
Okay. Something simple like that, because and seriously, somebody should really, people have been talking about changing the VIN number, and having the VIN number, or having the VIN number correlate to what was on the sheet on the window of the car when it was sold. I think there is a process that goes through that and correlates those two things.
Yep.
And maybe the OEMs need to make that available, so that when you have a VIN number, you can tell, oh yeah, the feature, the Distronic feature was available on this car, was put on there. Okay. And you go through the maintenance records and it was never turned off, or whether, I mean, the data are there. You could, I'm not saying it's easy, but you could, because the data are there.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, and I think like law enforcement and first responders on that piece of it, they don't think of this as necessarily being their responsibility. And they've got enough on their plates for sure. But
absolutely,
but I think it doesn't take much to just do some education around, hey, this is really important, not just for understanding, safety issues in the short term that need enforcement action, but again, developing policy over the long term. And if you just do a little bit of collection, and I think especially, making sure that there's a clear conduit from all of these little local law enforcement and first responder outfits to this NHTSA database. I think that might be in some ways the challenging piece of it. But again, I think, this is there are so many ways in which collecting and bringing data back to the policymakers can improve so many aspects of everything to do with, certainly with transportation, but even beyond. I think this is a really interesting test case. And I think that hopefully the motivation is really strong because, this isn't just about, making the sewer system work better or something like that. This is human lives, right? And I think that, especially first responders understand, how serious the cost of these crashes, which again, I think, it's way too easy in this country to just be casual about 40,000 people a year dying and just think of those as just numbers. The first responders know that this is not just numbers. They see the people, they see what happens, they deal with the family members. And so I really hope that that is something that can really be helped to again, just sort of improve this collection, get the data coming in from more sources, from more objective sources, and give them the tools to make that easy so that so it's not something that takes them out of their way to do it. It should just be a standard part of that, of the work that they do, because we have so far, and I think people don't understand necessarily how hard this technology is to regulate and how little data not that exists. As you say, there's data all over the place, right? But it's just not getting to the regulators and frankly to the public in really actionable ways. And I think the public needs to be a stakeholder in this. And so I think like helping people understand how far we have to go in making really high quality data-driven policy around this technology, and how important the very first step of it is this collecting this data. And now I think we move into the process of improving the collection of this data and improving the interpretation of this data so we can continue to make progress, because the next step after that again is policy, right? And translating the insights that we're getting out of this into really strong policy, which I think it will only be good for everyone.
Well, I'd like to take it beyond policy, because once you have a problem, I think every one of these companies wants to fix it. Yeah. There's no reason. I mean, look, Tesla, why not fix it over the air, update it, and it's fixed? I mean, it seems to be just seems to be so simple. Yeah, once you know that there's a problem, okay?
But the NTSB has pointed out problems with Tesla's, autopilot design since, 2018, 2019, 2020, they were doing these reports out there. And they have, when was the last time you remember the NTSB putting out safety recommendations stemming from investigations of fatal crashes, and the company just doesn't even acknowledge it or respond to it? I mean, that's pretty unprecedented, right?
Well, yeah, I know. I don't know. I mean, it just, maybe when the other companies all have over the air updating, they won't have that. They'll just deal with it. It just seems, yeah.
No, I mean, it's frustrating.
Why continue the name? I mean, it's almost silly. Okay, it's really almost silly.
It's really frustrating that they have such good data, but also Tesla, I mean, have better, ability to collect these data than anyone else. And yet how they use data publicly how their failure to respond to serious safety criticisms, and just how they respond in general to reporting and all kinds of other things. It's like they have all of everything they need to be way more transparent and build more public trust than anyone else. And yet Tesla is the outlier in the industry. I feel like everybody else in the industry, they're part of organizations like PAVE and things like that because they see building trust is so important. And as you were saying, one crash is not just a problem for that company, it's the problem for the whole industry. And again, Tesla is such an outlier in the attitude, right? And that's what's so frustrating, is that they have all the pieces in place to really build public trust by disclosing more data and things like that. And at every turn, I think they make decisions to do the opposite of that. And I think at some point that's one of the reckonings that has to happen here, because and I think the public needs to understand how different they are on attitudes, how everyone else in the industry really wants us to be like airlines, where, one airline goes down is not just an American Airlines problem, it's everyone's problem. And Tesla's just an outlier with that. And I think that hopefully, some of the enforcement actions that I think are coming down the line will be a start towards moving in that direction.
Ed, for years, I've offered to do a peer review of the Tesla data for free, okay? Or, to assemble whatever the brightest statistical minds in the nation to do a peer review of their data. And I've had everybody try to help me to get in the door to get them to do that. And of course, how successful have I been? Boom, zero. And it's really a shame. It's a shame because my gut feel is that 90% of the Tesla owners are very careful people. Okay, there are a few who knows what's that go out there that who knows what and decide to who knows what for who knows what, whatever, that then get into trouble, I think. And in the rides that I've had in Teslas and so on, and my use of my car that has something that is, I know, not as good as Tesla, damn things, I think they've saved my butt a couple of times. Yeah. Okay. And I just think that these systems do work. They probably don't work as well. And to me, the small number of reportings that are out here, although it may be because of the reasons we said, but these systems do work. So, but there are places where they don't, and they can still be improved, and almost trivially.
Yeah.
And darn it, it's a shame that we're not taking advantage of that. Darn it.
Yeah, and I think one of in my sense of just talking, again, this is not something I have from the regulators themselves, so grain of salt on this, but I think, we were sort of alluded to how hard it is to regulate the technology itself, right? And certainly NHTSA as an organization, that's their entire legacy has been, regulating mostly like mechanical defects, increasing electrical and things like that. But like this, they're not in machine learning. They're not, in computer vision. The kinds of problems that you get with those sorts of systems are not things that they're really necessarily going to be able to catch. But I think, that's why with the Tesla investigations, I get the sense, and the recent upgrade to an engineering analysis of that just happened the other week, they start to explicitly mention this. And it goes back to, there's a 2016 enforcement guidance that was put out, following the Josh Brown crash, that's still never been invoked. They've never taken enforcement action based on this yet. But I think this is what it's moving towards, which is around the idea of foreseeable misuse. And again, I think, part of the problem that we're dealing with these ADAS crashes, right? So first of all, I think we all know, right? If you're working with a single camera system, or a monocular camera system, it can do amazing things, and there can be a lot of safety advantages and benefits and stuff that can come out of that, but it is limited. It's fundamentally limited. We're not talking about LiDAR, radar, and camera 360 degrees, overlap, redundant and diverse, right? Like you cannot get those kinds of sensor suites onto vehicles, and so then the way you make up for that is by enhancing the brains by having that human there, right? The human has to be part of that system, part of that loop all the time. And unfortunately, again, in the sort of unsophisticated discourse that again has been kind of dominated by Tesla that we've had so far, this technology, and I mean level 2 ADAS has been framed as something really distinct from human drivers. It's like, here's this human driving, safety record, here's this level 2 ADAS. And I think what gets lost for a lot of people is that, actually how those humans behind the wheel are performing is very fundamental to the numbers in that L2 ADAS system. This is not comparing technology versus humans. This is comparing, and humans are really the last line. And as you know, from every safety analysis and whatever, it's that last line being there that's so important. And so I think when action is taken on autopilot and or full self-driving, which I do think I have a high confidence that something will happen in the next year or so, I don't think it's going to be them trying to say, oh, you have a problem in your machine learning that's causing you to lose lane lines and exit the lane or fail to see. I think regulating the perception systems and even being prescriptive about what sensors are in the cars is a hard thing for NHTSA to do. But what they can say is, and what they say in this enforcement guidance, is that if your system doesn't anticipate all of the ways in which a human could foreseeably misuse this system and take steps to prevent that misuse, that can itself constitute a defect. And again, I think it's taken time, and I think collecting this data is one of the things that needs to happen to move forward into this really unprecedented realm for NHTSA. They've never done anything really quite like this before. But I think, on this public education and awareness and with the media side of it, I think it's so important to emphasize that these level 2 systems, what distinguishes them is that they're not an unassisted human driving. They're not an automated driving system. They're a hybrid, right? You have like a human, you have a robot, and then you have cyborgs, which are sort of a fusion of the two. And if you take the human out of a cyborg, you have a robot that doesn't work, right? Fundamentally. And so I think when people understand, when I use these level 2 systems, I, as a human, am fundamentally part of this hybrid system. And I think, so I think this it's the human element of these level 2 systems that I think is going to be the focal point for NHTSA, in part because that's where a lot of the safety issues really genuinely are, because the human is the last line of defense, but also I think because it's something that they can regulate in a more sort of consistent way without having to go through and try and write rules around, like, that really gets into this technology that might apply to the way one company writes their code, but maybe not another, or the sensors that one uses and not another. And so I think the human piece of this, and also for public education, this is gonna be really important that people now understand a level 2 system is not just a kind of self-driving system. Its safety depends fundamentally on the human being a fully engaged part of that system all the time.
Look, it should be what NHTSA does, okay? And each of these companies has trivial technologies, then can figure out whether or not the user is misbehaving, okay? As GM put it out there, eye tracking. That's one. It has cameras inside. It can see whether or not you hung a Coke can on the damn steering wheel to provide torque, okay? There's no reason why the image processing systems can't go and check those things out, okay? And if it does, it should turn it off. It should turn it off, and it should be in the book and say, we're turning it off. And until you get a note from your mother saying that you've gone through 6 weeks of retraining to not hang a Coke bottle from it and try to game the system, you don't get to use it.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I know that I'm being somewhat silly, but that could be put in a structured form. This is, you're not required to use it. This is something that you have the opportunity to use if you behave. I mean, we missed the boat with respect to breathalyzers. We could put breathalyzers in cars to say the car doesn't run if you don't pass the breath test, okay? And we can put enough code in there, enough cameras, enough sensors in there to get 99% of the ways around it that any goofball would put in there. And, you never get 100%. All
Yeah.
right. But somehow we missed that with the systems. Okay. For who knows what reasons, we can't even go down with respect to these comfort and convenience systems that people use for comfort and convenience. They don't use it for safety. They think they can drive better than the car.
Yeah.
Okay. They use it for comfort. You want the comfort and convenience of this thing,
Yeah.
then you have to behave. And if you don't get it. It's like a toy for a kid. No,
Yeah.
I don't mean to,
No, but you're
I
absolutely right. But I think the other piece of this, so one of the things I'm really keeping an eye on is IHS, Insurance Institutes for Highway Safety. They developed some principles around level 2 ADAS that they're now in the process of translating into actual tests. And I think if you go into those and you look at the things that they say are important principles, I think there's a really important insight there. And I really commend the work that they've done, because what these are responding to is the fact that these level 2 systems, unfortunately, I think a lot of them are being put out and being marketed to take advantage of people's excitement about self-driving, fully autonomous technology, and to give people sort of well, we can't give you your self-driving car, but like, this is sort of as close as we can get, in something that we can sell you. And I think, what these IHS principles show is it's not just, part of it is absolutely calling it full self-driving, just the irresponsible demonstrations and talks and whatever. Those all things matter. And we're getting more data that really show a clear link between what these companies say and the misuse of these systems. But there's subtler things too, which is what IHS is going after, which is like, little cues that the system does that kind of encourages you to believe that it's sort of a self-driving system versus something that is very clearly an assistive system. And just like one of the sort of counterintuitive things is like, if you come to a stoplight and you have adaptive cruise control on, it should not then immediately restart. It should not automatically restart. It should be up to the human. If you come to a stop, that it should disengage, and the human has to proactively drive and then re-engage the system. Absolutely. So that it's clear this is about the human. The human is never not in control. These systems just exist to assist them. And again, these very subtly in these behavioral ways reinforce it and give people the wrong idea. So, well, you're right. A lot of it is misbehavior. I think, unfortunately, either through accident or I think maybe intention. In some cases, the design of these systems encourage people to treat them like self-driving systems when they're absolutely not. And so I think it's a multi-pronged thing. We need to attack it with education and the media and public awareness. But I think then on the manufacturer side, I think designing these ADAS systems to make it more clear, the automation is just here to help you out. You are fundamentally still the driver. We have a lot of progress to make on that.
Maybe we need a big sign, instead of these yellow things about the airbag. This system can kill you, just like I haven't bought a pack of cigarettes in 50 years. I don't know, but apparently that's on a pack of cigarettes these days. Yeah. I don't know. I wouldn't know. Anyway.
It's been about 5 years for me, and I can confirm there's definitely some pretty bone-chilling.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Congratulations to you.
Don't ever take one. I've been more than 50 years doing, if I had one, I'd be done. I mean, it would be terrible, whatever.
Yeah. I quit when I finished my book. So, I was not going to be able to finish the book and quit. So
don't write another book. It's not worth it.
Terrific. What a great discussion, Alan. One other thing we wanted to touch on before we wrap up here is that the Smart Driving Car Summit held this month, really exciting, and a lot coming out of it still. A lot to digest here.
Yep, it was. I'm still on cloud 9 as to how well the whole thing went out, and I think we're gonna change the world. We're still gonna do it, and I think for the right reasons. And we'll we I guess got a lot of people to Princeton who sort of were singing the same song, but it was pretty good.
Terrific. And what has to happen now to get the moves moving in New Jersey, I guess, is request for
Got to
proposals, all
find a
kinds of things.
technology
Yeah.
company that believes it, that believes that in fact, to get to massive scaling and societal and corporate value, that you start with the people who can benefit most, as opposed to the people who have already too many ways to get from A to B. But that's a philosophical difference, but all we need is one.
And we're on the road. We want to thank Ed Niedermeyer for spending time with us. Great insights, Ed, and really a terrific discussion. Find more at Autonocast, AUTONOCAST.com. His book again is titled Ludicrous, The Unvarnished Story of Tesla Motors. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a lot of fun, Ed. Thank you. Again, this is really brand new. It is a good step. It's in the right direction. We still have a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. And I guess my last shout out would be to folks who are covering this, because this is really hard. And I think, they have done a really great job. And I think, the exciting thing about this space is that you really do have to learn something every single day, whether you're working on the engineering or whether you're covering it as a reporter. And I think anyone who thrives on that kind of a challenge, I think this is the right place to be.
Yep.
Thank you to our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO. More info is available at motoetf.com. Technical support is provided by CARTS, the Corporation for Automated Road Transportation Safety, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to safe and high-quality mobility for all. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, Spreaker, wherever you turn to for podcasts. Smart speakers can play us too, of course. You can find my tech reports at techstination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin along with Alain Kornhauser. Thank you for listening or watching. Please stay safe.